Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. This isn't going to be a typical episode. For the new year, I just want to reminisce on 2014 and talk about the videos that I've already talked about, but add in some new information. Whether it was completely new information that I just discovered, something that I forgot to add, something I felt that I didn't really clarify too well, and so I'll use this to clarify it in more detail, explain it better, or something that just really felt out of place, like I wasn't sure where I was going to put it in the video, so you might see some of those in here as well. And this is going to be a pretty long episode, and I want to warn you, this is going to feel kind of choppy. The facts aren't necessarily in any order. I mean, they kind of are. I rearranged it to the best I could, but I'm wasting too much time right now. This is going to be a long video. So let me get on to the very first video I covered, which was Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. I never mentioned exactly when the album came out, aside from coming out in 1973. It was recorded in June of 72 all the way to January of 73, and then it was released in the US on March 17th, and then in the UK on March 24th. So a UK band released it in the US before the UK. I don't know. Something I really wanted to mention in the Dark Side of the Moon video, Pink Floyd is a huge Monty Python fan. During recording, they only stopped for one of two reasons: soccer and Monty Python. In fact, they used some of the money from their initial success of the album to help fund the Holy Grail. Did you enjoy the Holy Grail? If you did, give Pink Floyd a huge thanks. There was a bootleg released in February of 1972 at the Rainbow Theatre, and issued just 6 weeks later and sold over 100,000 copies because fans believed it was a real thing. It seemed pretty legit with professional packaging and everything. I mentioned in the song Breathe that Roger Waters wrote a song called Breathe for a film called The Body, but I didn't play it, but I want to play it now with the opening verse, and I want you to see on how similar it is to the final version of Breathe. In the song On the Run, I mentioned an 8-note sequence sped up to 100 beats per minute. Those 8 notes are D, F, G, F on octave below middle C, D, middle C, D, E on middle C octave at a tempo of 180 and modulates upwards occasionally. So if any viewers out there happen to have a synthesizer lying around, practice those notes and you too will be able to play the song On the Run. You can hear some laughing in the song, which supposedly differs from the original vinyl release and the CD release. Now, I can't notice that difference, but maybe I just wasn't looking in the right place. The song Time is described as a phenomenon in which time seems to pass more quickly as one ages, leading to the despair and old age over missed opportunities from the past. An interesting version of the Breathe reprise was heard at the Live Aid performance, in which they combined to Breathe and Breathe reprise together. I thought that was interesting. The Grey Gig in the Sky doesn't have any lyrics, only some spoken parts by Jerry, an Irish Abbey Road doorman, and Metheny Miv Watts, wife of roadie Peter Putty Watts and mother of actress Naomi Watts. The song was also known as the Mortality Sequence and the Religion Sequence, had a very similar piano solo without vocals, and instead features taped recordings of the Book of Ephesians and a recital of the Lord's Prayer and a narrative from Malcolm Muggeridge, a controversial host of religious programs on BBC. Claire Torrey, who sang the song, said she recorded her takes very quickly, and the track sheet shows that there were only 4 takes for her vocals. I want to play the beginning of The Great Gig in the Sky again. I want you guys to hear something. Doesn't this sound a little like... I don't know about you guys, but I feel that sounds very similar. One more thing about The Great Gig in the Sky. When the song was being recorded, keyboardist Richard Wright was recording the piano in one room and thought everybody else was recording in another room. He got upset when they realized they weren't. They were playing a joke and played an older recording. However, they liked his piano playing so much that they wanted to use that recording as part of the album. The song Us and Them is kind of neat because it has 2 sax solos in there. I know it's not necessarily a behind the scenes kind of thing. I mean, you'll know that if you actually listen to the song, but it's still kind of neat to point out. The song Any Color You Like was believed to be inspired by a quote by Henry Ford. Any customer can have any color he wants so long as it's black. With that being said, this clip of mine makes more sense. The song has been speculated to tie the concept by concerning the lack of choice in society while being alluded to thinking that he does have a choice. Yeah, I know there's a lot of extra stuff here that I didn't cover before that I wanted to. One more thing I know you guys want to hear me talk about is Dark Side of the Rainbow. The phenomenon in which you play Dark Side of the Moon alongside of The Wizard of Oz. I just want to say one thing right now, it works. However, I want to be able to cover that in more detail, so I will have a video down the road dedicated to just that. But until then, let's hear some facts about Abbey Road. My second video, Abbey Road, is considered one of the most iconic albums of all time. The recording took place between July 2nd and August 1st of 1969, although a lot of the songs were recorded earlier during the Levee sessions. Come Together, like I said in the original video, is a political rallying cry for writer, psychologist, and pro-drugs activist Tim Leary. Tim Leary campaigned against Ronald Reagan becoming governor of California, and Leary's slogan, "Come together, join the party." Some people believe that each verse represented each Beatle. It is neat how the song is broken up into 4 verses, so that theory could work. Is a reference to the spiritual George Harrison. Was a reference to Ringo. That line refers to John Lennon and Yoko Ono. That line is a reference to Paul McCartney. One interesting thing about the album was the BBC banned the record for a while, not because of anything political or sexual, none of that, but because of the reference of Coca-Cola. Commercial endorsements were not allowed. I mentioned how George Harrison got the first line of the song Something from a James Taylor song. The song actually didn't come out until later, but I think Taylor was still flattered to think that was true. In the song Maxwell Silver Hammer, even though the song credits Lennon and McCartney as the writers, John Lennon was in a car accident around that time, so he actually didn't really contribute to that song, if he contributed to it at all. I'm going to take advantage of this video to play an earlier version of Maxwell Silver Hammer. The intro is a little different, but the lyrics are for the most part the same. He kills Joan and his silver hammer makes sure that she's dead, then she kills the teacher. Yeah, I'm sure you're wondering, where am I going with this? What? Well, I guess aside from that, the song is about the same. Just listen to the anthology. I just thought it was funny, so I felt like sharing it. Oh Darling was one of those songs originally attempted during Let It Be. Ringo wrote the lyrics for Octopus's Garden, and they were written on a promotional paper for Ringo's 1969 film The Magic Christian, in which he co-stars with Peter Sellers. I Want You, She's So Heavy was a cry of love in several parts, recorded over a 6-month period between February and August. This is considered Lennon's simplest lyrics since the days of Love Me Do.
Love me do, you know I love you, I'll always be true.
Here Comes the Sun was another song in which John Lennon wasn't present due to the accident. When John and Yoko started to recover, he and Yoko had a double bed put into the studio, Yoko arranged a microphone to be above her head and give her comments while they were recording. Paul didn't like that very much. The instruments heard in the song Because was a combination of harpsichord, guitar, and the Moog synthesizer. There were 23 takes of the song, and they liked take 16 the best. The Abbey Road medley was really made up of a bunch of short, unfinished pieces that would fill up the entire second side of the album. Since they had a feeling this was going to be their last album, the Beatles decided to drop everything at once to make this medley. In fact, there was a working title known as A Huge Medley. That was going to be originally what this medley was going to be called. You Never Give Me Your Money seemed to be made up of a bunch of different parts that were put together. The first part about not being given money is a reference to all the struggles that they had with Apple Records. The next part is a reference to a student fresh out of college with no money. And the last part of the song is A Sweet Dream That Came True, which was a reference to Linda McCartney. Basically, this song is a bunch of different songs that didn't make it on their own. One of the lyrics heard in Sun King is Chica Verde, which thrown into the mix with Portuguese and Spanish and English and all that, is actually an expression from Liverpool, and it actually doesn't really mean anything. And the song allegedly came to John Lennon in a dream. Mean Mr. Mustard was composed in India in the spring of 1968, which means that it would have been written around the same time as a lot of those songs on the White Album. John's side of the song? A bit of crap I wrote in India. John Lennon wasn't too happy about Ringo's drumming in Polythene Pam, and that upset Ringo to the point where he actually had to leave for a couple days. Poor Ringo. There were several stories about the inspiration for She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. I mentioned a couple of them in the original video, but another slightly different version was that Paul lived in the heart of London, and, he would be a little bit more sociable than the other three Beatles. He would say hi, he would pose for photographs, and in fact, in some cases, the more sensible folk were able to walk his dog, Martha. On this occasion, while Paul was away, some fans managed to find a ladder and climb up through his bathroom window. And they went through his clothes, and somebody stole a picture of his father. Don't worry, he got it back. One of the neighbors saw this and called the police.
Sunday's on the phone to Monday. Tuesday's on the phone to me.
That's what that line is talking about there. Now, I don't know what Sunday being on the phone with Monday had to do with calling the cops about a break-in, but it meant something to Paul. The recording for Golden Slumbers took place while John was in the hospital, and so he didn't really play on the song at all. Even though it is credited as Lennon and McCartney as the writers, McCartney only wrote the first two lines of it as Once There Was a Way to Get Back Homeward. The rest was almost taken word for word from a Thomas Dekker lullaby. Although I don't think Dekker really cared in 1969 about Paul stealing his lullaby without giving him any credit, because the dude's been dead since 1632. Carry That Way was another song that was recorded while John was in the hospital, although they did go back and add in more vocals, including John's, later. John Lennon feels the song at the end is another unfinished song. Paul wanted to add in a couplet there at the end with "The love you take is equal to the love you make." John thought that couplet was good, even though when talking to Playboy, he got the words wrong by saying "the love you get is equal to the love you give." I guess it's close enough, but really? Abbey Road was the last time that all four Beatles were seen together to make an album. And now there was some music that was added later to Let It Be, which is why it was released after Abbey Road in 1970. Led Zeppelin's fourth album is one of those cases where the success of the album is a lesson in creating a brand mystique by not over-explaining and instead revealing a few very well-chosen clues that provoke discussion. Led Zeppelin 4 was recorded at Headley Grange, the same place where their fifth album, Houses of the Holy, and their sixth album, Physical Graffiti, was recorded at. The album could have had more than 8 songs on it. There were a couple songs from Physical Graffiti that were recorded during Led Zeppelin 3 and were planned to be put on Led Zeppelin 4, and those songs being Boogie with Stu and Black Country Woman. The song Black Dog was recorded in only 2 takes. I find that very impressive. And you can faintly hear John Bonham tapping his drumsticks to keep the time. Nicky Hopkins played piano on Rock and Roll. You might recognize that name as somebody who helped out a lot with the Stones, although he also contributed some help with The Who and the Beatles. There was some stuff in the Battle of Evermore that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't have the time. I wanted to expand on the idea a little bit more that many fans saw a lot of references to Return of the King, where a lot of the lyrics would describe the Battle of Pelennor. As Sauron's army and influence advanced, the sky darkened, and then when he lost the battle, the sky got light again. There was also the mention of ring wraiths, and there were several other references too. Although not all the lyrics were referenced to Return of the King, such as mentioning Avalon. Avalon is Latin, and it means the place with apples. And I have a random fact about Stairway to Heaven, and I know what you're thinking, you spent 5 minutes talking about Stairway to Heaven the first time around. What more can you possibly have to say about it? Well, I only have one little fact. Okay. John Paul Jones decided not to play bass. He felt the song was more of a folk song and decided to add in a string section and keyboards and flutes. In fact, he played a wooden recorder in the intro. Guitarist Jimmy Page said the song Four Sticks was supposed to be abstract. In the song When the Levee Breaks, I mentioned that line of going to Chicago, sorry I can't take you. That was taken from a Count Basie song from the 1930s. The Count Basie reference ended at going to Chicago, not the sorry I can't take you, so I apologize for the confusion there. I mentioned Memphis Minnie a lot. I put a link in the description below. I want you guys to hear her version of When the Levee Breaks, because it's really neat to hear where the inspiration for this song came from. Woodstock, 46 years ago, was probably the most famous live performance of all time. It was 3 days of peace and music, and although there wasn't necessarily any violence that broke out, that doesn't mean that people didn't get injured. There were overflow toilets, a lack of food and water, and a makeshift 20-bed hospital tent to accommodate for over 3,000 injuries. Some of these being 400 bad acid trips. In fact, they made an announcement about it.
All right. Everybody, please. Please. I am informed that somebody somewhere is giving out some flat blue acid. It is poison. That's deadly serious, man. I just informed we got 4 or 5 people who are a little sick from it. 15. Be cool. And whoever you are, man, I'd love to find you. I hate to belabor the point, but I will say it again in case nobody heard me the first time. There is someone giving out some flat blue acid. It is poison. There are 15 people who are very ill from it. If anybody tries to give you any, you do it.
That wasn't the only issue. It rained quite a bit during Woodstock, and what happens when you have rain? Mud. And what happens when you have a bunch of hippies sliding in the mud? Sprained ankles. There were a lot of those. There were also gashed feet from stepping on broken glass. That sounds incredibly painful. And there were also 2 babies being delivered. One was being delivered en route to the festival, and the other one, the woman had to be airlifted via helicopter, and the baby was delivered at the hospital. And I mentioned how whenever somebody tries to recreate Woodstock, that they just fail in comparison, whether it be violence or whatever. In fact, I think those are my exact words. Altamont is a perfect example of that. And I'll mention Altamont in more detail in the Rolling Stones section of the video. I must say that Tubular Bells was probably the hardest in terms of research, because there really wasn't a lot of information out there. And so this segment is going to be pretty short. You may have noticed various title cards that said like fast guitars, basses, Latin, etc. Those titles were actually taken from the Tubular Bells 2003, where each section actually was broken down into its own song. The first segment I forgot to mention was called Intro. In the section I called Blues, I didn't have a chance to really show why it was called Blues, because I had to make sure that it transitioned into thrash. So here it is, and this is why it's called Blues. You may have noticed in the credits, if you actually watched the credits, that I said that all music belongs to Mike Oldfield, Virgin Records, and Mercury Records. And that was because in 2008, Oldfield's 35-year deal with Virgin Records ended, and then all that got transferred over to Mercury Records. "1984, I was surprised I wasn't able to find too much information about that either. I mean, come on, it's Van Halen. You'd expect there'd be some information out there about them. One thing that I thought was interesting during the making of the album was guitarist Eddie Van Halen butting heads with producer Ted Templeman. I actually said his name right this time, about the direction of where the album would be going. Eddie Van Halen says that I would rather bomb with my own music than to make it with somebody else's, whereas Ted says, if you redo a proven hit, you're already halfway there. Both make a valid point. A really funny story with this album was when engineer Don Landy and Eddie Van Halen were mixing the album. Ted thought they were done and they had a deadline to meet at New Year's Eve. However, they weren't happy with how it was looking just yet. Ted would ring the phone while they were mixing and said, "Hey, I need you to let me in the gate." And so then Don would grab the master tapes and run out the back, and Eddie would be like, "I don't know where they are." And this went on for about 2 weeks, and Ted was afraid that they were going to destroy those master tapes, which clearly wasn't true. They just needed more time. One more thing I wanted to cover was how I mentioned Eddie Van Halen helped out Michael Jackson on the song Beat It, but the segment of the song that I played, I felt didn't really capture Eddie's contribution to the song, and so this segment here, I feel, captures his influence a little bit more. Something that I briefly mentioned in the Let It Bleed video was during the song Gimme Shelter, a lot of fans thought that the song was about Altamont. I only briefly mentioned it, but I figure I'll take advantage of this video and explain Altamont in a little bit more detail. Altamont was expected to be another Woodstock on the West Coast, and Woodstock being 3 days a piece of music, Altamont was a little bit more violent. Hell's Angels, which were hired as security guards, not a good idea. The Rolling Stones were performing as the final act in the show, and one of the members of the Hell's Angels got into a fight with Meredith Hunter, who was seen running towards the stage with a revolver. Alan Pissarro, one of the Hell's Angels, pulls out his knife and stabs him very close to the stage, which frightens the Stones, understandably, and now unfortunately Altamont lives in infamy for that moment. See, this is what happens when you try to recreate Woodstock. The Altamont film was released in 1970 and was rushed to be the Woodstock documentary. Fun random fact, George Lucas was one of the cameramen on set. Unfortunately, his camera jammed and so they couldn't use any of his footage, but it was still neat to know that he was there. And Gimme Shelter became known as the name for that film. I don't know if I would ever cover this in an individual episode, so I'm just going to go ahead and cover it here. Let me show you Through the Past Darkly. Now, you might be wondering two things right now. One, what is going on with that album cover? It's shaped like an octagon. Yes it is. And two, what does this have to do with Let It Bleed? Well, just give me a second, okay? I'll explain. I'll tie it back into Let It Bleed. See, Through the Past was kind of a memorial to late Brian Jones, who passed away at the age of 27 by drowning in his pool. One of the last songs he did, if not the last song he did, was Honky Tonk Woman, a song originally released as a single and then was later put on this album. In the song Country Honk, I kept referring to Honky Tonk Woman because the two songs are related. Honky Tonk Woman came out shortly after Jones's death, and after that, fans were expecting some big things from the Stones, which they succeeded with Let It Bleed. However, Country Honk almost felt sacrilegious. The fans thought that the Stones were ruining a really good song. Now, even though I like Honky Tonk Woman better, it is still neat to hear an alternate version of the song. In the song Midnight Rambler, when it was performed live, Mick Jagger took the role of the killer in the song. This was actually some great practice for his acting career. In 1970, he already appeared in 2 films, Ned Kelly and Performance. He also later appeared in Free Jack in 1992 and The Man from Elysian Fields in 2001. Sounds like I need to add those movies to my must-see list. In Monkey Man, the vibes, the slide guitar, Richard's bluesy riff, and Jim Miller's production, all the coverage of that seems to give Monkey Man a more dark and edgy recording, almost like Gimme Shelter, sorta. While flirting with the ideas of revolution and flower power, usually those moments seem to be exploitations as in Gimme Shelter. I had a lot to say about You Can't Always Get What You Want, and so I wasn't able to include all those facts in the original video, and so here are all those facts that didn't make it into the video. There was a conga player who can play congas and roll huge hash joints without missing a lick, as said by Al Cooper, who was originally part of Blood, Sweat and Tears. One of the backup singers in the album was Doris Troy, who had a hit in 1963 called Just One Look. Nanette Workman, I mentioned sang in the song Country Honk, was one of the many other voices that could be heard in You Can't Always Get What You Want. Everyone sat on the floor with either an acoustic guitar or some kind of percussion instrument, and Keith Richards and Mick Jagger would keep playing the song they wanted to record until everyone got the chord changes and the accents right.
I went down to the Chelsea drugstore to get your prescription filled.
The Chelsea drugstore was in Chelsea, but it actually wasn't a drugstore, but a pub. Stanley Kubrick filmed part of A Clockwork Orange there, and now the place is a McDonald's. The song was released as a single as the B-side to Honky Tonk Woman, although they had to cut the song, making it a 4-minute song instead of 7 minutes. Wow, that was a lot of information I had to cover. But as you can see, I needed to make this video. I had a lot to say. And I also covered every video I've made so far, and so you can use this video as kind of a checklist to determine on what videos you haven't seen or what you have seen. And if one of these is one that you haven't seen, go back and watch it, because I can guarantee you'll learn a lot. Until then, this has been Awesome Andrew of Awesome Albums, telling you why all those albums I mentioned were awesome albums, and I'll see you guys next time. Hi guys, Awesome Andrew here. I have one more thing I want to say before I go to credits. For one, I hope you've been enjoying my videos, and two, I have a lot more interesting things that are going to be coming out in 2015. But naturally, I also need to be making these awesome albums extras from time to time, because I can't necessarily include every piece of information into the original video, and so it's nice to have these as a backup. But if there's a piece of information about one of these albums that I didn't cover yet, go ahead and comment that in the section below, and I'd rather you also add a link in that comment as well, so that way I can make sure the information is legitimate. And if you like these videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and so that way you'll know when a new episode's coming out. I'd hate to see you guys miss out on either one of your favorite albums, or maybe one of those albums you're not too familiar with yet. I can guarantee you'll learn a lot. But until then, I want to thank you again for watching the videos, and I hope to see you in the next one. See ya.